like you said, if we had infinite amount of money, infinite tax dollars pouring in, if we gave all our money to the government, it would still never be enough.
Never be enough.
So we need to prioritize. So let's talk about what some of those. One of the priorities, of course, being is let's fix what we've got.
Yes.
Of course, the problem is now that what we've got is this huge. I mean, one of the best illustrations is the map of Cleveland that is in the report.
Yeah.
And here is this thing where Cleveland has like doubled in size, but population hasn't. So you've got now all of this infrastructure that has to now be maintained and upgraded and repairs made, and you still have the same population base. Probably roughly the same amount of tax revenue dollars that's available. How do you do that?
Paying for 10 times the level of infrastructure. And a lot, these decisions are made in different segments by different levels of government. And so there's not really a whole accounting of the burden it's putting on the taxpayer. And it's hard to point in any one place because, like I said, it's not a coordinated effort.
Right.
What happens is, the state comes in and they build a big highway, and then at each of the off-ramps, there's development, and that requires a lot of local streets to be built and local sewer and local water,
Yep.
and it just all kind of sprinkles out. And each single decision might seem defensible, but nobody is looking at the whole. And what also happens is transportation is spending money, and it's the stormwater folks that are paying the bill.
Yeah.
And frankly, if you drive more, it brings more money into the transportation folks' coffers, while it might be putting a burden on some other part of the budget's responsibility. And so we don't handle this in a unified manner. So a lot of the difficulties, they're spread wide, and it makes it very difficult to get our arms around it. Just in terms of transportation, it's handled at the state level, but a lot of these other issues like local development decisions are at the local level. If you talk to the locals, they feel pushed into a lot of these decisions by the way the transportation is laid out by the state. If you talk to the state, they feel pushed into these decisions by a lot of the land use decisions that are happening at the local level. And I understand both sides, but I wish we'd all stop being martyrs about it and just get in the same room and have a conversation, because we've watched the damage and the expense that this has caused for 50 years. This should be reasonably anticipatable by now.
Yeah.
And we're kind of got blinders on, and we're going to pretend like we've learned nothing, or maybe we have learned nothing. But from my perspective and from the taxpayer perspective, it seems to me that you should have to figure this out before you ask us for more money.
Yeah, just a personal example of how the two, how you would think that this is a city issue, but in fact it involves the state coming in. There is a pedestrian crossing signal at what's called Highway 370 or the Sac Memorial Highway, just about half mile that way from me. Big 4-lane highway that links Bellevue out to Gretna and the interstate. Heavily used. So they put a bicycle lane that I can ride, and there's a pedestrian crossing sign at this major intersection, a 4-lane highway and a 4-lane street, right, 72nd Street. So the problem is that the signal on the north side of the intersection wasn't angled right, so you could never see if, in fact, you could actually cross as a pedestrian, right? And I was riding my bike there going over to the shop, and I was always sort of guessing, well, did it change? Should I cross? And so truck traffic, everything coming through there. So I contacted the city, who I thought the sign belonged to, and the city said, well, no, it doesn't belong to us. It belongs to the state, even though it's in the city limit.
This is a really important issue, and I work with a lot of mayors, and they'll say, if you talk to my constituents, in their mind, I manage everything. Everything in my city belongs to me, whether it belongs to me or not, and I think that that's often the case.
Right.
But so many times you do have, that segment that belongs to the county, but the segment you drive onto afterwards belongs to the state, and then over there belongs to the city, and they all use that as a reason why they can't be held responsible for a problem that is propped up. Right. But really, it's all their fault.
Yeah,
Every last one of them, but mostly the state because they have all the money. They
Right.
have way more money than any other institution. And this is a federally funded state-run program, as
Right.
I am constantly reminded by state DOTs. Therefore, if the coordination isn't occurring, if things aren't being thought through, you got to put the responsibility mainly in front of the people that control the majority of the funds.
Yeah. Well, the good news is that the guy that is responsible for maintaining what is the cities has a good working relationship with the Nebraska Department of Hot Roads.
That is good news.
And so he called them, and it took a couple of weeks, but they adjusted the sign. And now when I ride my bike over there, I can clearly see that now I can cross rather than risking life and limb. So that's a good example. Let's talk a little bit about how the funding process works. Because as I understand it, the way this works is I buy a tank of gasoline, I'll pay 18.4 cents of that is going to go to the federal government. The federal government then takes and disperses that in lump payments, I gather, to the various states. And of course, there's this whole red state, blue state thing about who's getting more money, and the blue states are saying we're paying more, but it's those red states that are, that whole political thing that's going on.
Well, and I will say at this point, every single state is getting more from the federal transportation program than they're paying in. Every last one of them is a welfare recipient at this point.
Okay. So how do we, there's some suggestions about how we get, because we obviously need to fix what we've got. We're way shortfalls on that. I forget what the number was. I think it's in the paper. Just to repair the bridges, it's like, 50,
$72 billion or something like that, yes. And I will point out, at the same time that, the state of Alabama needs to fix bridges, they're building a $5.4 billion Northern Beltline outside of Birmingham that will reduce traffic congestion in an uncongested area by 1 to 3%.
Right.
So I don't know that we do have a funding crisis.
Yeah.
If you took that off the books, do we have a funding crisis? Maybe not. Or maybe we have less of one. Maybe we have one that is more politically palatable to fix. And that's one example. There are examples like this in Wisconsin and Michigan and many states that are building massive expansions based on modeling that has already been proven untrue. These projects were started in the year 2000, and they modeled there'd be all this traffic. Well, we've been able to look back and see how wrong the model was, but that's not dissuaded them from building massive billion-dollar new structures while they're shutting down bridges. So again, my first position is do better with what you have before you plead poverty. But then, if you can get your house in order, there are ways to raise money. And frankly, the gas tax has been the way we've done it for some time. It can continue to work for some time. That's the simplest thing to do. You just raise the gas tax. But after decades of talking about taxing being bad, well, everyone believes it, so that's very challenging.
Right. Yeah.
There's been talk about moving towards a vehicle miles travel tax, which is based on how far you drive rather than how much oil you burn because cars are becoming more fuel efficient. I will point out that we are not in an emergency place where all cars are about to become so fuel efficient that you can't earn money off of the gas tax.
No, you see that every when the University of Michigan comes out with their monthly report on how fuel economy is. It's stuck in neutral. I mean, it's
we're going to make gains,
24.5, then it goes to 24.2, it's not going anywhere. It's not actually making any
and even as it goes up, we have CAFE standards that will put it very high by the year 2025, I believe, which is, still 9 years off. And then once that happens, that's just those vehicles being sold.
Right.
All the old vehicles will still be on the road. It takes 15 years, and actually that number is going up because cars are so much more reliable before the entire fleet turns over. So we're talking about 30, 40 years away from having such an efficient fleet that the current gas tax will really be eaten up. And even when we reach that point, we still will be burning gasoline. What's interesting is we may not be burning as much gasoline, not just because the cars are more fuel efficient, but because people may have reached their limit on how far they can stand to drive.
Right.
So you're just kind of moving away from, from anything other than just logic. People have a general tolerance on how much they want to travel for work or travel, period. You go back to ancient times and they would walk 2 to 3 miles. That was about 45 minutes of commuting.
Right.
You bring the horse in, you can go further. You bring the train in, you can go further. You bring the car in, you can go further. You bring the interstates in, you can go further. But people generally don't want to travel more than 30, 45 minutes no matter what.
Yeah.
We weren't going to reach a day where the hour-and-a-half commute was standard because people run out of tolerance for that, for giving that much of their day over to travel. So that's one thing. We just reached the end of how far these efficiencies could take people. The other thing is the household's gotten smaller. I know that we love designing the world around a household with kids. And as someone who is part of a household with kids, I love the idea that the world should be designed around my needs. Right. However, I have to admit, I am in the minority. My generation, little Generation X, so tiny everyone forgets we exist, we are the ones in the middle of child rearing. We're the smallest generation in 100 years. So we should have probably predicted that those who tend to drive the most, parents with young children and growing kids, well, if we were going to be a small part of the population, then driving was going to be a smaller part of our system.
Yep.
Millennials and basically anyone younger than me. The Gen X folks are cut too.
Yeah.
Folks who are Gen X younger than me and millennials, they value telecom and computers and things like that more than cars. We've seen that over and over in surveys. They want to stay connected without that having to mean they physically are present. And looking at careers, that makes a lot of sense today. Those are the careers that are the most lucrative and the most flexible. People older than me still value cars and that sort of lifestyle more. And as this younger generation comes into the workforce, they are moving to places they want to live before they find jobs. So now companies are following talent, and talent is locating in places where they don't have to spend their entire life in a car.
Yep.
And so we now need to build our transportation to address the market. And we're still building our transportation to address the needs of 1985.
Yeah. So what's that? What does the transportation needs of the 21st century look like in your mind?
Well, they're a lot more complicated. I think that we have to acknowledge that we can't do a one-size-fits-all approach to transportation. We developed a federal transportation program, like you said, to lay out an interstate system. And we've taken a lot of those design rules and we've applied them to local roads. And that's where things go wrong. An interstate design for an interstate makes sense. When you take those wide lanes and clear zones on the side and stick them in the middle of a town center, you've created an economic problem. You've now taken all the activity away from the road. And that's exactly where you want it. You want that gathering place. Yeah. And so we first need to figure out how to build all of the transportation products. Our roads have got to be expressways where expressways are appropriate, and downtown streets where that's appropriate. And then the land use along the sides of them have to meet that need as well. So if your goal is to move people through town, you're not developing all the way along the side, so you have to add lights, and you have curb cuts, and you have all kinds of things interfering with your traffic flow. You keep it clear, and you have people go through. If your goal is to build a place where people will live, work, and play, then the traffic has to support the live, work, and play. It can't be primary. So one is, I think we have to redesign completely the way our safety guides, our design guides are built, because they're all created around the notion of building expressways. And then they're applied, just like in your circumstance with the bicycle crossing, towards car speeds. If you see slip lanes where people can take right-hand turns without slowing down, and then you put a crosswalk in the middle of it,
Yep.
I mean, the idea, why don't we just be honest and put a bullseye in the middle of it? That's insane.
On the middle of my back.
Exactly. But that's in our safety guide. That is patented as a safe way to engineer roads. Yeah. And it comes from a notion that people should be there. We'll stripe the place for people to go as a check, but not as a serious method. So We need to rewrite those. And that's one of the things I do in my technical assistance. I work with states, and we've been working with Michigan and Vermont and Florida, and we're talking to a bunch of other states now to rewrite their procedures that they use to develop projects, to consider these things and to build, to first identify what they're trying to build. Is this an actual highway, or is this a main street? And then design it appropriately. I think we also have to acknowledge that people are, they're a little more demanding these days. They want all these roads to accommodate everybody. That creates conflicts. We have to think through that. But they also want really good transit. And we need to figure out how to bring that more into the program. I will point out that there's a lot that's good in our transit program that we could bring into the program writ large that would be helpful. In the transit program, we have a formula program that's supposed to be used for maintenance and repair. And then we have a competitive grant program. I mean, it's sort of competitive grant program, but it basically, there are hoops you have to jump through to prove that A, your project is worthwhile, and B, you can maintain the rest of your system in order to build new. Imagine if we brought that into the highway side. That model alone could fix a lot of this. And what we would say is, okay, you can either create something that we believe is viable and prove you can maintain your current system, or if you can't, we have loan programs where we'll help to defray the cost, but you still own the risk. Or if that doesn't work either, then it's on you. And if you still think it's a priority, then you have to pay for it yourself. And it treats the federal government more like an investor, which is what we really are, rather than just a sugar daddy.
Yeah. So what would you like people to do? I mean, the people are going to be some, people that will be listening to this. What do you want them to get out of this, to be able to do, to talk to the local mayor, to attend city council meetings, to write letters to the editor, educate themselves more, obviously read the paper? What else?
Well, I think that they need to realize that most of the decision making is happening at the state level, and keep a closer eye on how their states are spending all of this money. The federal program right now is $60 billion a year. That's a lot of money that's going out right now. And that's not all of it, because the states raise their own gas tax, and they more than double that. So looking at how that money is being spent and engaging that process, talking to your state legislators and making sure they understand that they are at the level of government that controls this money, and holding them accountable for it too is a good idea. And then when you're talking to congressmen, we shouldn't just talk about a funding problem. We need to talk about a spending problem. We need to talk about allocating this money more effectively, acknowledging that the federal role is not simply to build big roads that connect cities. It is to create strong economies. And that might involve building something other than an interstate, and building ways for local people to get around that might be cheaper and that might be responding to market demand.
Right, and impacts and has a wider impact on everyone. People that can afford the luxury of owning an automobile, and people that either economically or just simply philosophically don't want to. To get involved with the car.
I philosophically want to spend my money to go to Paris instead.
Where you can rent bicycles, and if you need a car, there's an electric car on the corner you can rent temporarily. So
exactly.
Yep. Good. Very good. Well, look, thank you so much, Beth, for taking the time to talk to us. We'll put a link to the paper, and certainly encourage everybody to read it. And hopefully, okay. So let's talk briefly before we close up. Any predictions on who that next president's going to be that you want to read this paper?
I have absolutely given up predicting anything about this election season. I've always viewed myself as having great instincts on these things, but I have no instinct for what is happening this year. I will be very interested to see if they talk about transportation at all. It really hasn't gotten much attention, but there's been so much to pay attention to this year. And it would require
transgender bathrooms. That's really important.
Right. That's the only trans we're talking about. That's right. But I think at some point they'll mention that for the economy, it's good to invest in more and better infrastructure. I hope that reporters will hold them to that and ask for a little more detail. because all spending and all projects are not good projects.
Yeah.
And we've had this pact of silence for years where we pretend like every project ever built by any transportation agency is a worthwhile project. That is not true. And we need to be a little more discerning. And it would be very interesting to hear from these candidates, what sort of quality control they believe should be put on this program if we're going to spend $60 billion plus per year on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Beth, thank you so much.
It was great to meet you. Thank you.
Okay, pleasure meeting you too.
Take care.
Have a great week.